Hello and welcome to another daily Muppet. In today's video, we're going to talk about all of the transfer information that is flying around from Gakpo to Enzo Fernandez to Vlahovic to Christian Pulisic and everything in between. And of course, how the sale situation might affect all of this, because it does in some respect. So let's get right into that. So first, talking about Gakpo and Pulisic here. So as mentioned, United are looking for, United are looking for somebody up front, obviously with Ronaldo's departure. And there's two different possibilities here in terms of outcome. I don't believe there's two in addition, but two different possibilities in terms of outcome, which is one, getting somebody in like Cody Gakpo, or two, bringing in a short-term player like Christian Pulisic. Now, what I can say is this. Regarding Cody Gakpo, he is absolutely Ten Hag's main target, who he wants, and he is pushing for United to make an offer in January. They know exactly what the cost is. He has the same agents as Gakpo. Their personal terms and things are not an issue. The deal is not done or anything like that, but it's essentially, in a respect, it can be. It's one of those ones that can be done. They know the price. They've known the price. People can say the price is still going up because of his performances at the World Cup. Not so much. World Cup tax is real and it isn't. It always gets pushed during the World Cup, like it's going to have a huge effect. And there are clubs that bite on World Cup performances, but it's usually not at this level of competition, or, the bigger clubs are not usually the ones who are paying for those kind of inflated costs. Paul Pogba asked to leave after his World Cup performance, and Real Madrid didn't suddenly value him a lot higher. Nobody does. The bigger clubs don't generally pay a World Cup tax. It's often at the smaller level where you get more of the breakout players that get noticed during the World Cup that end up being transferred for a higher amount. World Cup tax is kind of not real, especially when you talk about a winter market. The other issue is that PSV are needing money, and so they need a sale. His price is going to be around 50 million, and it's going to stay there. That's what it is. And United know that, and they know that if they offer that, that's what they'll take. PSV had a whole situation with someone even leaving the club, right? Because partly because he didn't sell Gakpo and get the club the money that they needed. So that's Ten Hag's main target. He's going to push for them to make an offer in January. I'll talk about how a sale affects all this in a minute. Pulisic is another actual name there was interest in summer, and there is interest in now as a short-term option because he's out of favor at Chelsea, would like to leave, and there potentially could be something there. Now, he makes obviously a bit less sense than Cody Gakpo. Now, with regards to Gakpo, again, people talk about, well, is he a striker? Is he a 9? We need a 9. When you look at his frame, when you look at his physical abilities, when you look at his size, all of that, I don't see why he couldn't be the 9. He plays across the front three in many different times. He's talented. He's good on ball. He has a lot of good instincts. He could be a 9. It's the type of player he could be. Yeah, I just don't see why he couldn't. And if Ten Hag feels that he can play in that position, as well as providing support in others and being a bit fluid, which he obviously really likes Marcus Rashford for, right? For being fluid and being able to mix around a bit. Obviously, you want a striker, but I think that he sees the potential in Gakpo there. But perhaps he would also be looking to bring in another striker on top of him, should they not be able to rely on Anthony Martial. Because you have to remember that. If they can rely on Anthony Martial, you're not expecting a big striker purchase in summer, so Gakpo would be the main name. Pulisic, again, short-term signing. It's been explored before. There's some truth to it. It just depends. And again, I'll get to the sale and how it's going to affect these two things. Enzo Fernandez, there were some reports in Portugal today that from 3 different outlets that United were watching and very interested. But again, his price is going to be very expensive. It is not possible at all in January, but in summer. If they decide, this is where I'm looking at, if they decide to pursue, say, Gakpo in January, and we have new owners come summer, I could see someone like Enzo Fernandez being brought in, as well as a goalkeeper, as well as potentially a right back, and just getting everything that's needed. You could see that happening. So it's one to keep an eye on, because I know they've been watching a lot of players in Portugal, and Enzo Fernandez is certainly high up the list, as I've mentioned before, as a better Fred, essentially, with the idea that they could let Fred go, then bring Enzo in, and he could start in between Casemiro and Bruno Fernandes. It makes perfect sense. Eriksen is getting older. You give him the more rotation. Again, we've seen kind of the downside over the last month of games prior to the World Cup of having Eriksen deep, what he brings, but what he doesn't, and why a more perfect engine like Enzo would be an awesome fit. So that would be one I would definitely keep an eye on. Next, I want to talk about Vlahovic and Juve, because Juventus had their entire board resign, and financial things, they could be sanctioned. They've misreported like 200 million in losses, things like that. And I mentioned this some time ago before the reports came out, but United were keeping an eye on the Vlahovic situation, because you realize when these things come out, there are people in the football circles who know that things are not looking so good for a certain club, and there was an idea that things at Juventus might go to crap, and it could free up Vlahovic to potentially leave if Juventus need to sell now to raise money to get out of a potential financial situation, as well as get out of potential sanctions and things like that. So that would be one I would keep a strong eye on now for January as well, because if something happens, if they're getting sanctioned, if this or that, you never know what could happen here. I don't think it'll be happening in January, but again, keep a strong eye on it over the next 2 windows. Good player, could absolutely be on the outs at Juventus. They may be needing to dump assets, and it could be an option. And I just definitely one I would still keep an eye on. As I said a couple months ago, now it is a good time to keep an eye on it. This is somewhat of what was expected, that Juve could end up in some trouble, and it might make him more available. So that's an interesting one to me, because you get someone like Enzo, Gakpo, and Vlahovic in, you've got the whole front line sorted. But that's too many players. They're going to need to move on. Obviously, players like, I see what happens with Sancho and things like that, which I'm not going to talk more about now. I don't know much about the stories coming out, and it seems like a bit of just speculation. Obviously, Ten Hag has been super happy with Sancho. He's not in favor, but that's just kind of guesswork a bit. He's doing extra training. He's going to get back in form. We'll see what happens. I do expect him to improve. With regards to the right back, this is another situation that's going to be somewhat dependent on the sale. You have Frimpong, who's, again, yes, watched. He would be available to replace Wan-Bissaka, who is absolutely within a shout of leaving in January. He is quite close to Palace, as far as I know, in terms of terms. Some terms being agreed there for potential loan plus a buy option or something like that. So he could be quite close to going to Palace, and Frimpong would be an option. At the same time, you have Ethan Laird out on there, and Luckhurst was talking about it. It's something I've heard for a while, that they may be looking at potentially recalling loans, given the sales situation, just pulling players back in that are out there that they can use in the team instead of spending, because they may not have the money to spend right now, depending on the sale. So that's what I want to talk about next, is the whole sales situation. It's one thing I want to clear up is there's been a lot of speculation like there's some secret deal already done, and that's why the share prices have gone up and things like that. That's not how the stock exchange works. Not when the vast majority of the Class A shares that are on the New York Stock Exchange are owned by people like you and I, small groups, investors, things like that, who don't know anything more than you or I. Share price rises on speculation and information. It rose when the Glazers made the announcement that they were going to sell. That doesn't mean this club is already sold and it's all done. It means it's rising because the market feel that that people in the market are buying up shares, which forces the price to rise because there's a lack of supply and more demand for it, because they feel it's now a good investment at a low price, because they're speculating that the situation of the club will improve and become more desirable, more financially successful with the sale of the Glazers, as well as obviously the influx of money, all the things that come with a sale. The market believe a sale is a good thing, so the share price rises. You understand? It's actually that simple. The market believe a sale is a good thing, so when a sale is announced, the share price rises. That's it. That's all it means. You cannot speculate more than that about what these share prices mean 99% of the time. It doesn't mean there's some secret deal. And so with regards to that, it's going to go through the process. That's why they hired the Rain Group and have the Rothschild Bank, performing the thing, because they're going to do a due diligence and a due process to getting a sale done. It doesn't mean they may not have preferred people or people they're already speaking to, things like that, because they do, but it has to go through a normal process to be sold. Decisions will be made, and so with regards to Gakpo, Pulisic, Frimpong, Laird, etc., decisions are going to be made closer to January on how or what spending can occur. They could decide to not spend at all and bring in, say, Pulisic and recall Laird. That is a possibility, simply because they may be in a situation with the sale where buyers don't want money being spent without their approval. You could say, well, it's not that much money, but it is. It's going to be very dependent on the situation for prospective new owners and how far along discussions are. If they're far enough along that they can discuss it and say, look, the coach wants Gakpo, it's going to help with getting Champions League. The new potential owners could even talk with Murtaugh, with Fletcher, with Arnold, with Ten Hag, and decide, yeah, we're fine with you adding this to the debt, because realize something. There's debt. It's 40 million in transfer debt. Even if you buy Gakpo and put 10 million down. During many transitions, there's often a freeze in businesses. There's a freeze on spending and sometimes budget cuts. But at the same time, the current budget includes Ronaldo wages, so it can be possible because it can be affordable this year. But realize it's not just this year. When you buy a player, you have a transfer debt out into the future, and you have wages out into the future. So it does change the books, does change the balance sheet, it does change all of it. So it's not insignificant. It's going to be dependent on where and how far things are with prospective new buyers and people who are discussing the purchase of the club. So all of that has to be factored in before any spending will be approved. And from what I hear, it is up in the air right now. Ten Hag wants an offer to be made for Gakpo in January, but there is uncertainty as to whether the Glazers will sign off on it and where things will be at come end of December, early January with regards to the sale. They do want it done by summer, and so there's a possibility they may look at it and say, we don't want to complicate the situation, we're going to hold everything, do nothing, let Wan-Bissaka go, recall Laird, sign nobody, maybe a loan that has no implication beyond summer, and then get the sale in summer and someone comes in and invests a lot. There is that possibility of that happening. There is. That being said, I'm sure there's been discussions from Ten Hag with the club when they, terminated Ronaldo's contract, although they didn't really have a choice at that point in time, about what happens now. So it is up in the air. It does remain to be seen, and it is going to be dependent on how far along things are in the process with the Rain Group and the sale. But the expectation is within a few weeks, we should start to hear some more concrete names outside of Sir Jim Ratcliffe coming out in the media. There are other groups. There are people I've spoken to, similar to early on with Ineos and all that, where, this is a much more complicated process than a transfer. So it's a little trickier for me in discussions because, like, I spoke with somebody where if I had said something a month earlier, people would have potentially known exactly who he was. Not general people, but people in his in his area, and that could have been problematic. So there's things like that right now with other groups, but I'll pass along anything I can. And hopefully things do come out in the media shortly. But this is a much more complicated thing to report on. I have less certainty in how to report on it than just transfers in general where the stakes are very low. I certainly wouldn't want to mess anything up by having something come out there that isn't supposed to be out there when it comes to something like this. Not that I think that we could, but regardless, it'll be an interesting time. So that being said, been a great World Cup continuing for Manchester United players who lead the World Cup in goals. 2 from Bruno, 1 from yesterday. I mean, Casemiro with a fantastic goal, Bruno with 2 great goals. It's good times. Rashford will be starting today for England, and we'll be hoping USA also beat Iran, and both England and USA will move out of the groups. So Thank you for watching this video. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn notifications on, and I will see you in the next one.